Hello, everybody, and welcome to this end of the year edition of Talking Business with Chad and Mike. And we're going to kind of touch a lot of bases here. Mike, what are you going to kick us off with?
Well, first of all, Chad, it is the end of the year, and it has been a very interesting year on a lot of different levels. But speaking about this podcast, I've really enjoyed this podcast this last year. I don't know if you realize it, but we've done 15 episodes, actually 14 on our own podcast channel, and then one with the infamous, famous, notorious Rook. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And that was a lot of fun. So I was thinking that we kind of just maybe quickly go through some of the guests and some of the subjects and sort of realize that our interviews and guests were all over the place, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, they were. And, it's this year and the year and a half or so that we've been doing the show, it definitely has flown by. And, it's been a lot of interesting content. And it's just been, a real pleasure, to do this with you as well, Mike. So lead the way.
Well, before I do that, what I just want to say is how we met. Very serendipitously, we were in a networking group, and basically all women except for you and me. And it wasn't as if we didn't relate to the women, because I'm not going to say anything that will get me in trouble, but you and I absolutely related to one another. And actually, that's where the podcast was born. So, and as you said, it's really been terrific. So talking about the guests, in no particular order, we've had people talking about wine. We've had people talking about a virtual assistant business. We've had people talking about networking. We've had people talking about HR on a global level. We've had people talking about DEI. We've had a radio host who's probably has 100,000 followers on his radio broadcast. We've talked about, we've actually met with a hypnotist, although we weren't hypnotized during the session, but we know that she's very effective in what she does. We actually talked to a wellness coach. We talked to a fraction CFO. We talked to a fellow who's focusing software for coaches with AI. My goodness, we've talked to someone, a specialist in marketing. We've talked to somebody, a specialist in digital video. We spoke to one fellow who's involved in corporate communications, not unlike you. So, we really covered the gamut of people talking business with Chad and Mike. It was a lot more than just business, right? It was business and personal and how to grow both professionally and personally. We asked some interesting questions. We got a lot of interesting feedback. And I think we came up with, I think you and I, to make this 30 minutes really worthwhile, we came up with about 4 different topics that we think would be interesting from the people that we interviewed this past year. Do you agree?
Yeah, out of all those different guests that we had, there were so many different ways to go, so many different topics, people that we've also had an opportunity to meet, in person in real life beyond just the Zoom, whether it's at other events, networking, which is a nice segue, and what we'll touch on first here. Networking, we've each been doing this for a pretty good long time. You have, more experience at this than I do, but how much is networking, if we think about how much it's changed over the past 20 years versus how much it's changed in the past 5 years? It took such a huge leap, in the, since the pandemic. What were some of the strengths, that you've seen as far as some of the changes in networking, over the past, 4 or 5 years compared to before that?
Well, in the past, networking was always face-to-face, at least for me, was always face-to-face, and there was just one discipline in a meeting. So there was one consultant, there may have been a business coach, but not necessarily, and there'd be, maybe several lawyers in different disciplines, but it was always one of the same discipline. Networking today is not like that at all. Networking today is remote, and there are many people in the group of the same discipline, but they're in different locations. So I may be in a group, typically I'm a member of H7, something that Clay Hicks has run. And there are maybe a business coach, a business consultant, an executive coach, a life coach, all in the same meeting and all over the country and internationally. That's totally different than what it was prior to the pandemic. And actually, initially, at first, I found it a little bit difficult, but I've actually gotten very used to it because it's exposing me to people in my discipline in different places, and I find it really quite fascinating. And I'm not worried about the competition at all because I mean, you compete with everyone at this point, so it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think the competition or being in groups with peers, there's obviously the competitive factor. That's always going to be there. But also, there are opportunities, to help get better, to learn something we didn't know before. Looking, for people that we can collaborate with. Like what we do is, has overlap, between one another. And I think that's actually one of the things that, we hit it off within that first networking meeting where we met each other. That was one of the things that we had in common was the type of work we do with the type of people that we do work for. And, you really, it's good for expanding, the network. We each, talk to people across the country, internationally. And even though prior to the pandemic, I was doing a fair amount of remote work already, had been for over a decade easily, but most of the economy had not really embraced it. Technology had, IT had, different elements of coaching, had, but as far as for the wholesale, we're going online and we're going to have Zoom meetings, it wasn't quite there yet. And, it's pros and cons. You get, it takes a little bit longer, to get to know people. And I think it's definitely some of that mining, looking for the gems in the group. Because sometimes, you go into a networking group, especially one where there's a lot of repetition. Like I say, there's a lot of coaches and consultants. Kind of sifting through to find the people that you can relate to. I think that takes a little bit more time, a little bit more effort, just because you don't have that. It's your little voice in your head. Maybe it's not quite as active as when you meet somebody in person.
Well, yes, but life just takes its twists and turns, and right now, remote really is. It's not to say that we don't do. I actually do meet with my clients face to face when I can here in New York, and I do attend at least once a month a networking group in person here in New York where I live. But but Zoom and remote networking has opened up a whole other world. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I see some of the negatives, but I also see the positives. On balance, I'd say I'm glad to be doing this at this time. I would never have met you, but yeah. I think we've networking for now. We could probably spend the whole 30 minutes that we've allocated on networking. Let's move on and take one of the other topics that we talked about, and I want to talk there about a very interesting session we had with Jonathan Shepard, who is a lawyer who basically works with law firms to help them work through the 4 different generations that are currently working in large law firms today. So you've got boomers, I guess 46 to mid 60s. You've got millennials. You've got you've got Gen X's after that. Then you've got millennials, Gen Y. And then you've got Gen Z, and I think we've run out of the alphabet, but we've got some others, so another generation coming up real soon. And, it's very obvious that he pointed out how different, perhaps similar, all of these different generations are. I found that conversation, I found that topic just really amazing. What do you think about it?
It's one of those things that I see this a lot with clients as well, where there's different leadership and communication challenges across the different generations. And one of I think the mistakes that people do make is they treat them too specific, too special, versus having a common, like, this is what we're here, this is what we're, going to do, this is what your job is, versus trying to cater to what this particular generation, what the perception is that this generation, wants from the workplace. Like with Gen Z, it's all about meaning. And, there's definitely some, communication and behavioral challenges that come along with that. And some of the corrective, actions that have to be taken, some of the expectations that had to be set are things we really didn't have to do before. And did the pandemic play a role in that? Yeah. But also, I think the bigger issue was there was nobody really setting the role models, the expectations of what they were supposed to do when they got into the workplace. And those roosters are coming home coming into roost right now. It's interesting to see how the different generations interact, and when it's done well. And there's times when it doesn't do well, and things have to be done. What have you seen as far as with the different generations?
Well, I think that I try to break down the walls, and I really try to avoid the general perception.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm thinking of some of the businesses that I have as clients, that it really is a mix. And yeah, there are differences, but I kind of find that it's not as big a problem as sometimes. But then again, you work more in a corporate environment than I do. I work in a small business. So the Gen Z or the Gen Y are typically the very technically astute people, and the millennials and the boomers are typically the more sales and marketing people, and somewhat marketing people. So that I find that it doesn't matter what generation you are. The key in business is addressing all of the expectations that we have. Employer has expectations of employees. Mm-hmm. Employees have expectations of their employers, and employees have expectations of one another. And really, it's just life, and you got to figure it out. You're a specialist in communications. I'm sure that as much as it's a challenge, it's also an opportunity, and it probably is on some levels. I'm going to say it's probably fun to see the differences.
Well, definitely true on both accounts, and one of the things that really helps address any differences that exist is level setting. It's like, what are we here for? What's the outcome that everybody's working for? And like you said, what are the expectations that everybody needs to do? Where places tend to go wrong is when they start making accommodations. And we see these in a lot of workplaces, where, especially started on the West Coast in IT, where leadership wanted to know what everybody thought. That got completely out of hand. To where, like, we want feedback, we want input that's constructive, but outside of that, you need to do your job. And kind of tamper back the getting up on your soapbox and telling leadership what the employees think they should be doing all the time. But it's interesting that we have so many different generations in the workplace right now. There's some organizations that do it pretty well. The military is one. You are behaving according to a set of norms and standards, regardless of your generation, for the most part. And there's lessons to be learned from that, and there's also things that just don't apply. But it's probably going to become more prevalent, especially the longer that people live, the longer that people stay in the workforce. You have people staying longer, which is great. You have some people that probably should be entering the workforce younger and earlier than what they're doing.
Well, yes, you're right. And another part of that, and I don't want to spend too much more time on that, but transparency is also a very interesting aspect of the different generations, and the expectation of transparency within the business. And that's another subject. And I'm thinking we're probably going to pick this up when we start in 2025. We'll come back to some of these topics and maybe finish up some of what we haven't been able to say because of the time factor. So let's move on. We were going to talk about AI.
Can you have a year in review show without talking about AI? No, you can't. So, we'll touch it on it here for like 5 or so minutes. It's something that's not going away. And I think that, a lot of people have kind of either come to the position of how is it used ethically and, professionally, for productive reasons, while also keeping in mind, what are some of the threats? What are some of the pitfalls from it? And you have people that are willing to overlook the pitfalls in the dangers just to utilize something that gives them a perceived advantage. But there's still an awful lot of questions out there. Like a lot of corporations have banned employees from using AI, whether it's from liability, AI, IP concerns, stuff like that. I have a number of clients that have done that, like thou shalt not use it, period. Some are you can use it if you get permission from legal. Um, but in academia, it's a whole brave new world. People are writing papers with it, literally. And one thing that I encountered was in my one of my alma mater programs is there's a lot of foreign students, and they were using AI to write papers, and that was way better than their command of the English language. So it was easy to spot. So how do we wrangle this, dragon, as we go forward? It's not going to go away. I mean, what are some of the examples that you've seen where, it's really made a positive difference for people? I know we've talked about AI tools, about some of the stuff that we use just between ourselves.
Yeah, I have found it to be very helpful in looking for an opinion to start a conversation. So, I'll say, I think recently, I did a wine tasting on Italian wines. And so I wanted to really do some research, but I didn't have a lot of time. So I asked ChatGPT, I think it was Perplexity, I asked them certain questions about the wine and came up with some really good stuff that I found very useful in my presentations. And I checked for its accuracy, at least from what I knew. So that was very helpful. I find that writing certain emails where you're trying to give a certain tone, you can ask ChatGPT to basically write it in a certain style. Mm-hmm. I've asked it if I was reading a book and I really wanted some clarification, I would ask it that. Or I'd ask, where was a word, how could I use this word in a particular situation? So AI helped me in some of that. No, I found it very helpful, and sort of like, instead of just going to Google and just typing in the question, I've gone to ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude or Notebook LM, and there are so many of these things. And also there are ones that do video. Mm-hmm. So I find it's a very useful tool. It will become more useful. People will get really good at using it, and we'll also know who's faking it.
Well, and also kind of brings us into the horseshoe and the horse and buggy and car argument or discussion. What happens as this technology moves forward? Like within video, which we've discussed, you can create a video with text. Whatever it is, a paragraph, couple paragraphs or whatever, and it'll get you about 80% there. You had to edit it some, but something that might have taken 1 or 2, 3 days to do, you can knock it out in like 2 or 3 hours.
Yes, it can, but also it's a little bit of BS at the moment, and
well, that's why you got to edit it.
Well, I'll give you an example. There's a Notebook LM out there. I typed in to do a review or summary of my website, Voice of Reason Consulting, and not only did a review, which was reasonably accurate, it also did a podcast of 2 people talking about Voice of Reason. And at first I was astounded, and then I listened to it, and it was just so much fluff and fakery. So, but obviously that's going to change. But in the meantime, more to be said and more to learn going on.
Well, it's a starting point, and then how's it contained, and I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out over time, because everybody's in on it now. Besides the ones you mentioned, Google, Microsoft, Apple, everybody's got their flavor of AI.
You're right. Absolutely. But here's the fascinating part of it, and this really is the fascinating part, is that we've said it'll work itself out in time. Time is not what we know it used to be. Time would have been years, months. Now, time are days and weeks. So when it comes to AI, literally time is so short into what is emerging. So 2025 is going to be one heck of a year when it comes to AI, because I think we're going to see changes on a weekly basis. That's I think going to be remarkably different. So last topic is the use of the word fractionals.
Mm.
So what do you think of that, Chad?
Well, it's interesting with being a coach and having done consulting, prior to that. In a sense, we're fractionals already. We're brought in on a temporary basis, typically, or to something to augment what they're doing. I'll find myself being a fractional chief communications officer or a fractional, advisor or something like that, where they don't want someone on the books full time, but they're, doing a service part time. It's, I think it'll be interesting in that, does it continue to be something that's done domestically by expertise here in the United States? Or is that going to be something that's going to fall into being offshored as well? Because it is kind of made to do that to a certain extent, but I think it's going to come down to the quality and the access, because there is something to be said about proximity. You're in New York, I'm in Chicago. There is something to be said about businesses in our metro areas. A lot of them still want to hire someone they can reach out and see. Even though we might have the virtual meetings, we might do the Zoom trainings, whatever else. It's that peace of the mind. We're like, okay, there's something we have in common. You're in the New York area. You're in the Chicago area. And I think that's one thing that works in favor for fractionals that are in those markets. Now, we can always project outside, of our home areas. But I think the other danger is, I think some people have waded into the space that really don't belong there, at the same time. Someone that'll like pick up the label of I'm a fractional, whatever, and then you kind of look at their book of business or their portfolio. And it's like someone that calls himself a coach or a consultant. Do you really do what you do? Do you have the chops, to do what you're claiming to do? I think that is one area that whoever hires someone that's for a fractional work, you need to just make sure you're getting what you're paying for.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't disagree with you. I think the bottom line of the use of fractional is that it's so expansive. It includes so much. If you think of a fractional CFO who can be an accountant manager, can be a controller, can be a bookkeeper. It runs the gamut. It can be somebody who's been in financial operations in the corporate world for 25 years and now has moved over to a smaller market, smaller medium-sized businesses. So the title is so inclusive, all inclusive. I think that's part of the issue. And I would agree with you. The proof is in the pudding, right? Whatever that expression is. I mean, you really have to really take a close look. Fractional CMO, fractional CTO, fractional CFO, fractional CRO, fractional. I think you really have to take a close look. So it looks like we're getting closer to the end of our session. Any thoughts? I know we're going to meet next week and talk more about 2025. Mm-hmm. But again, I want to just say I really enjoyed this year, and I really enjoyed all of those interviews. And I tell you, I keep meeting interesting people. The last 2 days, I've had some amazing conversations with people, and I'm thinking, I sure as heck want to bring them on and interview with 25. I think it'd be fascinating, at least to me. Mm-hmm. Aren't we doing this for us? Oh no, we're doing it for that audience that's out there too, right?
Right. Well, I think it's going to be, what we've done today has been interesting. What we're talking about, some different things for next year, maybe some ways we tweak the shows for the audience. But, I think the bigger thing for next year is looking at the potential, looking at the opportunity. There's a lot of pent up, desire to get out there and do business. There's a lot of changing in the economic headwinds going on that I think is just going to unleash a lot of opportunity, everywhere. And the smart money is going to be ready to pounce on it. Is looking for what some of the trends are, listening to our little show, listen to some other stuff, read stuff, kind of like read the tea leaves and see what they mean to you. And, a lot of, success and opportunity comes down to being ready when it happens. What's the definition of luck is, basically you're prepared, for opportunities when they present themselves, and I think 2025 is going to be one of those years. I think we're going to see a surge for, business opportunities, for people looking for different opportunities in employment. I think that pendulum is probably going to swing back into the employee side of the swing spectrum again. Right now, it's over on the employer side. I think we're going to see a swing again as everything grows. So it'll be interesting to see.
We'll have a lot of fun talking about all of that. So I guess this is the time where we're just going to say Happy Hanukkah, Happy Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Festivus. Have I left anything out? Happy New Year.
Also, Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year.
Because we won't be back till after then, till January for as well. But yeah, definitely have a happy Hanukkah, you and your family, and Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah and everything else that you may celebrate out there in the internet. And we look forward to seeing you in the new year.
Absolutely. So, Chad, it's been a pleasure. Audience out there, I can't see you. You can see me. I can't see you, but it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we can bring some value to you in 2025. Take care.